My son handed me a folder across the dinner table and said, "Dad, it's time. You can't handle things anymore." Inside that folder was a contract, transferring my entire $3.8 million home into his name, the same house where I raised him, the same one his mother died in. If I refused, he and his wife would have me declared mentally unfit. They thought they were saving me from myself. They had no idea I'd been quietly preparing for them. See, I wasn't just an old man. I was an auditor, and I was about to conduct my final review. Before I tell you what was in my folder that night, let me take you back to where it began. The day the trap was planted. It was a soft September afternoon, the kind that feels like summer pretending not to end. I was in the garden, kneeling beside Margaret's roses, deep red, velvet petals she planted 30 years ago. They were blooming beautifully this year, maybe because I talked to them every morning, telling them how much she'd have loved them still. The crunch of gravel behind me broke the calm. It wasn't the mailman. It was too deliberate, too entitled. When I turned, I saw that familiar silver Mercedes cutting through the sunlight. Out stepped my son, Dr. Ethan Carter, in his pristine suit, followed by his wife, Sophie, wearing that same expression she reserved for her clients, polished concern hiding quiet calculation. "Dad," Ethan said warmly, voice rehearsed. "We thought we'd stop by and check on you." I stood, brushing soil from my hands. "You mean check in on me?" Sophie smiled without warmth. "We've been worried. You shouldn't be living out here all alone. Big property, lots of upkeep. Not safe for someone your age. My age. Funny how people start using that phrase like a verdict." I gestured toward the porch. "Tea's on the table. Let's talk there." Inside, sunlight spilled through the bay windows, painting everything gold. The furniture Margaret chose. The photos of family vacations that used to mean something. Now they felt like exhibits in a museum of a life I no longer recognized. Ethan sat across from me. Sophie stayed standing, scanning the walls like a lawyer evaluating evidence. Then Ethan placed the folder on the table. "This is for you," he said, sliding it toward me. I opened it, and just like that the air left the room. Property transfer agreement. My name, his name, sign here. He spoke gently, like explaining surgery to a patient. "Dad, this is just practical. You'll still live here. We'll just help with taxes, maintenance." "Ownership," I interrupted. "You'll help with ownership." Sophie crossed her arms. "Don't make this difficult, Bruce. It's for your safety. Ethan's been losing sleep worrying about you." I looked at my son. "Is that true, son? You've been losing sleep over my house?" His smile faltered. "Over you, Dad." I leaned back, my fingers tracing the edge of the table. This same table had seen birthday cakes, Christmas dinners, and now, betrayal in legal print. "Do you remember what I used to say when you were little?" I asked quietly. "When you make a mistake in surgery, it costs a life. But when you make a mistake with family, it costs a soul." Ethan blinked, uncomfortable. "Dad, please, don't make this emotional." I smiled thinly. "Emotion is all I have left." "Ethan, you took logic the day you walked in here with that folder." Sophie exhaled sharply. "We're not your enemies, Bruce. We're trying to prevent confusion." There it was, the key word, the one they'd rehearsed. Confusion. The first step in a legal process that would strip me of rights. Quietly, cleanly. But they didn't know something. They didn't know I'd seen everything coming. See, I hadn't been confused at all. In fact, 2 weeks earlier, I'd received a letter from my financial advisor. Withdrawals from my investment account. $50,000 here, $20,000 there, all under my son's authorization, transferred into Sophie's firm's escrow accounts. So I played the fool, the weak father, and as I nodded slowly, pretending to consider their offer, I began setting the first stone of my own plan. "You'll have my answer tomorrow," I told them, gently sliding the folder back. Sophie frowned. "Tomorrow?" "Yes," I said. "You of all people should understand, Sophie. I never sign contracts without reading every line." Her lips pressed thin. Ethan reached out, squeezing my hand. "I love you, Dad. We're doing this for you." I smiled. "Of course, son. Just like I built this house for you." They left soon after. The Mercedes disappeared down the drive, and when silence returned, I went to my study, to a drawer they didn't know existed. Inside was my folder, receipts, transfers, statements, every piece of evidence that my son and his wife had been siphoning money from my trust fund for 2 years. And now they wanted the rest. I poured myself a glass of scotch, raised it toward the window where the last sunlight touched the roses, and whispered, "You always said I should be proud of him, Margaret. Maybe I will be, when he learns what pride really costs." Tomorrow, they'd walk in smiling, ready to take my house. But what they didn't know was that I'd already sold it, and the contract waiting for them wasn't theirs. The night before the meeting, I barely slept. Not because I was afraid, but because I wanted to remember everything. The way the walls looked under the lamplight, the smell of the old oak floors, the soft ticking of the clock Margaret bought the day we moved in. That house wasn't just wood and concrete. It was a record of a life built with love, and it was about to become evidence. By morning, the air had changed, the kind of silence that feels expectant. I dressed in my best charcoal suit, the one I wore to her funeral, and brewed a pot of coffee strong enough to cut through any lie. At precisely 10:03 a.m., the silver Mercedes returned, right on time. They were punctual, I'll give them that. Ethan stepped out first, holding that same briefcase that once carried his med school notes. Now it carried betrayal. Sophie followed, phone already in hand, probably recording, in case her senile father-in-law said something useful in court later. I opened the door before they could knock. "Morning," I said, calm, steady. They weren't expecting that. "Morning, Dad," Ethan replied with that practiced smile. "Did you think about the papers?" "Oh, I did more than think," I said, stepping aside. "Come in." They followed me to the living room. The same folder they'd given me sat neatly on the coffee table. Beside it, another folder, mine, thicker, heavier. "Before we sign anything," I said, "there's something you should see." Sophie's eyes flickered to my folder, then to Ethan. She didn't like surprises. "Good." I opened the first page, a copy of my property deed, now stamped and sealed. Ethan frowned. "What's this?" I smiled faintly. "A sale contract. The house is already sold." His face drained. "You, what?" "Yesterday," I said evenly. "Signed, notarized, and transferred." Sophie leaned forward, voice tight. "To who?" "To someone who appreciates roses more than greed," I said. "Her name's Ms. Lane. She's a widow. Made her fortune in auditing, funnily enough." The irony wasn't lost on me. They were both staring now, disbelieving, scrambling. "You can't do that," Sophie said. "You need our authorization for any major financial—" "Correction," I interrupted. "That would be true if you had legal power of attorney. Which you don't, yet." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Dad, be reasonable. You can't just—" "Reasonable?" I chuckled softly. "I spent 40 years auditing companies who thought they could move numbers in silence. Do you know what they all had in common?" Neither spoke. They all forgot who kept the records. I reached into the folder again, pulling out a series of printouts, each neatly labeled. Bank statements, wire transfers, digital copies of emails. Sophie froze when she saw the headers. Her firm's letterhead, account movements linking to her name. Ethan's voice cracked. "Dad, what is this?" "Your transactions," I said. $318,000 over 2 years. Moved from my trust, disguised as consulting fees. Funny thing, though, no invoices. Sophie's hand trembled slightly, but she tried to keep her tone smooth. "You don't understand how—" "I understand perfectly," I cut in. "I was a financial auditor for 37 years. Do you really think you could forge my signature on withdrawal slips without me noticing?" Ethan's face went pale. "You knew?" "Of course I knew," I said softly. "But I wanted to see how far you'd go." The air felt sharp now. Even the sunlight through the window seemed colder. I leaned forward. "You wanted this house? You could have just asked. Instead, you tried to take it by law, the same law I funded you to learn, Sophie. And you, Ethan, you used the hands I taught to heal people, to steal from your father." Neither spoke. Just silence. Heavy, desperate. Then Sophie found her footing again. She always did. "You have no proof these weren't authorized," she said quickly. "Your mental state." "My mental state?" I smiled. "You might want to check the signatures on those transfers again." I slid another page toward her. "Those weren't mine. They were yours. I reported them to the authorities 3 days ago." Ethan's voice cracked. "Dad, no." "Oh, yes," I said. "You see, when I sold the house, I didn't take cash. I moved the funds into a trust, one that names you both as beneficiaries. On one condition." Sophie narrowed her eyes. "What condition?" "That you both attend the meeting scheduled tomorrow morning." "At the firm handling the sale." Ethan frowned. "Why? What for?" "You'll see," I said. "Think of it as the final audit." I stood gathering my folder. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have roses to water." Margaret hated when I let them wilt. They just sat there, pale, shaken, speechless. For the first time in years, I saw something new in my son's eyes. Not superiority, not pity, fear. When they finally left, the Mercedes tires crunched against the gravel again. Same sound as before, only this time, it sounded like panic. I watched them go, the house quiet once more. And I whispered to the empty room. They thought I was the prey, but I've been keeping records all my life. The house was quiet again, too quiet. I stood by the window, watching the silver Mercedes shrink down the driveway until it disappeared behind the iron gates. For a long while I didn't move. The roses swayed gently in the afternoon breeze, their red petals trembling like whispers of the past. I thought of Margaret, how she used to say, "You can forgive them later, Bruce, but first, make them understand what they did." And that's exactly what I plan to do. Tomorrow morning, they'd walk into the law office expecting a formality, maybe an apology, maybe a signature. But what awaited them was a reckoning. I turned toward my desk, the last place in the world that still felt like mine. Stacks of old ledgers, handwritten notes, and audit reports neatly bound with clips. Every line told a story. Every number told the truth. And tomorrow those numbers would speak louder than any courtroom ever could. That night I barely slept. I replayed every detail in my mind, and the way Ethan's jaw clenched when I mentioned the missing money, the flicker of fear in Sophie's eyes when she saw the evidence. They weren't expecting a fight. They were expecting surrender. They'd forgotten that I built my life catching people exactly like them. By morning, the sun was low and golden. I dressed simply, navy blazer, pressed white shirt, clean shoes polished to a soft shine. Margaret always said, "If you're going to bury someone's pride, do it with grace." At precisely 9:40 a.m., I locked the front door and walked to the end of the driveway where Ms. Lane was waiting in her car. She rolled down the window, smiling softly. "Ready, Mr. Bruce?" "More than ready," I said. Ms. Lane wasn't just a buyer, she was an ally. We'd met months earlier through an estate consultant. What began as a simple sale inquiry turned into something far more complex once. I told her what my son and daughter-in-law had planned. She'd lost her own inheritance once, cheated out of her family business by greedy cousins. She understood betrayal and she understood audits. When I told her I wanted not revenge but clarity, she said the same 3 words that sealed the deal. "Let's build evidence." So together we did. Now, as we pulled up outside the law firm, she placed her hand gently on my arm. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" I smiled. "I've been ready since the day I taught that boy to count change at the grocery store." Inside the law office, the air smelled like polished mahogany and tension. Ethan and Sophie were already there, seated stiffly across the conference table. A pot of untouched coffee sat in the center, steam curling lazily like an omen. Ethan stood when he saw me. "Dad." Sophie forced a polite smile. "Mr. Chandler, thank you for coming." "Wouldn't miss it for the world," I said, setting my briefcase on the table. Behind me, Ms. Lane entered quietly, setting her own file beside mine. Sophie's eyes darted to her immediately. "And you are?" "Eleanor Lane," she said with practiced calm. "I'm the buyer of Mr. Chandler's property, and his financial auditor for the transaction." Sophie blinked, thrown off by the double title. "You're both?" "That's correct," Ms. Lane replied smoothly. "I specialize in estate audits for high-value property transitions." Ethan glanced at her, then at me. "Dad, what's going on here?" I looked at them both. "This," I said evenly, "is the part where I stop pretending not to know who you've become." Ms. Lane slid a folder across the table. "Inside this are the full financial records of the Chandler Trust account. Every transaction, every transfer, every forged authorization." Sophie's hand twitched toward the folder, but Ms. Lane spoke first. "Touch it, and this meeting ends here. I'll hand it directly to the police." Sophie froze. Ethan's voice rose, thin and trembling. "You had no right to dig through our—" I cut him off, my voice calm but sharp. "It's my trust, my name, my wife's legacy. Everything in there was built before you could spell your own." The room fell silent. Even the ticking of the wall clock seemed to hold its breath. Ms. Lane opened the folder and began reading aloud. Item 14, unauthorized wire transfer to SL Consulting, LLC, registered to Sophie Lane Chandler. Item 27, additional withdrawal, disguised as renovation expense, transferred to Ethan Chandler's private account. Ethan's face went white. "Dad, it's not what it looks like." "Then tell me," I said softly. "What does it look like?" He didn't answer. Sophie straightened, her voice cracking slightly. "You can't prove intent. These could have been errors. Errors don't come with fake invoices, Ms. Lane replied, and certainly not signed from your firm's internal system. Sophie swallowed hard. How did you even get access to those? Ms. Lane smiled faintly. Let's just say the firm's IT department was more loyal to me than to you. The silence that followed was deafening. I leaned forward, folding my hands. I sold the house, I said. The money's in a secured trust, but you won't see a penny of it until a few conditions are met. Ethan's voice was brittle. What conditions? I looked him in the eye. Confession, repayment, and apology, written, notarized, and public. Not to me, but to your mother's memory. He flinched like I'd hit him. She believed in you, I said quietly. When I told her you were becoming arrogant, she said, he's just finding his way. When you missed her last Christmas, she said, he's busy saving lives. And now look what you're saving, your pride. Ethan's lip trembled. Sophie reached for his hand, but he pulled it away. Ms. Lane closed her folder and stood. I'll give you until tomorrow to decide. Otherwise, we'll proceed with the full audit report and a legal claim. She turned to me. Shall we, Mr. Chandler? I rose slowly, meeting my son's eyes one last time. He looked smaller now. Not the surgeon. Not the success story. Just a boy who finally saw the weight of what he'd done. At the door, I paused and said softly, You know, Ethan, Margaret used to say, you can't inherit character. You earn it. I guess I should have listened sooner. Then I walked out, leaving behind two people who had thought they were predators, and realizing too late that the prey had kept the receipts. The drive home was silent. Ms. Lane didn't speak, and neither did I. The world outside blurred by in the trees, the highway, the dull gray clouds gathering on the horizon. But inside my mind, everything was loud. Every word I'd said to Ethan echoed like a thunderclap. Every memory of him as a child, his first steps, the way he'd run to me with scraped knees, the way he'd whisper, Dad, look what I made, collided with the man I had faced today. The boy was gone. What sat across from me was something colder, crafted perhaps by ambition, or maybe by the absence of a mother's guidance. When Ms. Lane pulled up to the house, she turned off the engine but didn't step out right away. Bruce, she said softly, I've handled hundreds of estate audits. But what I saw today, that wasn't greed. That was fear. I looked at her. Fear of what? Of losing control, she said. People like them, once they build their lives on power, they can't stand the idea of losing even an inch. Her words lingered as I stepped out of the car. The house loomed ahead, tall and quiet. The last piece of a life I'd built with Margaret. Inside, everything still smelled faintly of her, jasmine and lavender. Her picture hung above the mantel, a candid photo from our 25th anniversary. Her eyes half closed in laughter. I hadn't been able to move it in years. I poured myself a glass of water, set it on the table, and stared at the folder Ms. Lane had given me before she left. Inside was something she'd found when reviewing the trust archives. Your wife's handwriting, she'd said, handing it to me. I think you should see this before tomorrow. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the worn envelope. The first thing I noticed was the scent, faintly floral like old perfume. The letter inside was yellowed at the edges, folded neatly. Margaret's handwriting curved delicately across the page, every letter familiar. My dearest Bruce, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't tell you everything in person. Maybe it's because I was afraid of what it would do to you. Maybe because I hoped Ethan would change before you ever had to know. But you deserve the truth. My chest tightened. I sank slowly into the chair, reading each word like it was air. Ethan has always reminded me of you, your determination, your stubbornness, your brilliance. But he also carries something darker, something I fear comes from me. I see the same hunger in him that my father had, the hunger to control, to own, to possess. My father destroyed our family with it. He taught me that love is a transaction. I thought I'd broken that chain when I married you. But sometimes I see that same look in Ethan's eyes. I stopped reading for a moment, gripping the letter tightly. My heart pounded. Margaret had known. She'd seen it even back then. The very thing I'd been blind to all these years. I continued reading. Promise me, Bruce, that if he ever turns that ambition against you, you'll protect yourself. Not through anger. You were never a cruel man. But through patience, through strategy. You always told me, an audit never lies. So audit his heart. Bruce, audit his choices. And when the time comes, let him face what he's built. I love you. And if you ever doubt what's right, remember, a son can inherit your house, your wealth, your name, but never your integrity. The final words blurred as my eyes filled with tears. For a long moment, I just sat there, the silence pressing against me like the weight of the years we'd shared. She had known this day would come. She'd written me a roadmap for survival. I folded the letter carefully, slid it back into its envelope, and set it beside her picture. "Thank you, Margaret," I whispered. "You always saw farther than I did." That night, I walked through the house one last time. Each room carried ghosts of laughter and love, and the faint scent of the life we built. I knew then that no matter what came next, I couldn't stay here any longer. The house had been a home. Now it was a memory wrapped in betrayal. At dawn, I packed a single bag, the essentials, the letter, and the keys to the trust safe. Before leaving, I stood by the rose garden. The Caroline roses swayed in the early light, just as they had the day she left this world. I knelt, pressed my palm against the soil, and said softly, "He'll learn, Margaret. Not today, but soon." Then I got in the car and drove away, leaving behind the mansion that had once symbolized everything, now reduced to just walls and echoes. Hours later, as I reached the outskirts of the city, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Ms. Lane. "You were right. There's another account, hidden offshore, under Sophie's name, and Ethan signed off on it." My grip tightened on the wheel. So it wasn't just greed. It was theft, premeditated. I pulled over at a rest stop, heart pounding. Margaret's words echoed in my mind. "Audit his heart, Bruce." And now I had every figure I needed. This wasn't about property anymore. It was about legacy, opulent exposure. Tomorrow the audit would go public, and when it did, everything they'd built on deception would crumble. That night, I checked into a quiet inn by the coast. The ocean roared outside, steady, unrelenting. As I drifted to sleep, I realized something strange. For the first time since Margaret's passing, I didn't feel alone. The house felt heavier that week, not from time, but from secrets waiting to be uncovered. The roses outside were wilting in the early October chill, their scent fading, their petals dropping one by one, just like the illusions my son had built around himself. For the first time in months, I locked the study door. The mahogany desk that once held family photographs was now a battlefield of paperwork, financial records, trust deeds, old account ledgers, and a slim silver laptop humming softly in the silence. I had always believed numbers don't lie. They whisper if you know how to listen. And that night, they whispered everything I needed to know. Ms. Lane sat across from me, the same calm intelligence in her eyes that I once admired in Margaret. "I've traced all the movements," she said, sliding a file toward me. "It's worse than you imagined." Inside were copies of wire transfers, small amounts at first, carefully hidden under maintenance costs and consulting fees. But one pattern stood out. The recipient, Sophie Langford, my daughter-in-law. She'd been funneling money out of the family's charitable trust, the one Caroline and I had built for scholarships, and disguising it as operational expenses for Ethan's medical foundation. "She's clever," Ms. Lane said softly. "Too clever," I replied. "But cleverness without conscience is a ticking bomb." The next day, Ethan called. His voice was polished, almost sweet. "Dad, we just wanted to check on you. Have you had a chance to think about the paperwork?" "Yes," I said calmly, "I have. Why don't you both come over on Sunday evening? There's something I'd like you to see." There was a pause. I could hear the faint sound of Sophie whispering something to him in the background. Then Ethan said, "Of course, Dad, we'll be there." That Sunday, the house looked different, brighter, almost theatrical. I made sure the lights in the study were dimmed, the roses arranged in a vase on the desk, and the large envelope marked transfer documents lying in plain sight. Inside that envelope wasn't the deed they wanted. It was something far more dangerous. When the doorbell rang, I felt no fear, only precision. Sophie entered first, her lawyer's poise polished to perfection. Ethan followed, his jaw tight with manufactured patience. They sat, smiled, waited. "Dad," Sophie began, her tone sweet as honey but sharp as glass, "we just want to make sure you're comfortable. Managing such a large property alone can be overwhelming at your age." I nodded slowly. "You're right. That's why I decided to make things simpler." Their eyes lit up. They thought they'd won. I slid the envelope across the desk. "This," I said, "contains all the documents you'll need." Ethan reached for it immediately. Sophie's nails clicked against the table as she snatched it first, opening it with the eagerness of someone tasting victory. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Her smile froze as she read the first line. "Notice of formal audit and financial review. filed by Bruce Langford, principal trustee. She blinked. What is this? I leaned back, clasping my hands. An audit. Of the trust. Of the accounts. Of the foundation. Everything. Ethan's face drained of color. You can't do that. Those funds are managed through your wife's firm, yes, I interrupted quietly. And you signed the authorizations, which means you're both legally responsible. The room fell silent except for the soft tick of the grandfather clock in the hall, the same one that had marked every betrayal, every realization. Dad, Ethan whispered, his voice trembling. You wouldn't... I already have, I said. And the authorities will soon have everything they need. Sophie stood up suddenly. You're bluffing. Ms. Lane stepped out from the hallway, her presence quiet but commanding. I assure you he's not, she said, holding another folder. This one, stamped with the emblem of the State Financial Crimes Bureau. Sophie's composure cracked for the first time. Ethan's hands began to shake. I watched them both, the surgeon and the lawyer, standing in the home they tried to steal. The irony wasn't lost on me. They had spent years building their reputations on control and confidence, but tonight they looked like children who just realized the world had teeth. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't gloat. I simply stood. You thought this was about a house, I said quietly. It's about respect, about what's left of it. Ethan stared at me, anger flashing behind his humiliation. This is insane. You're destroying the family. No, I said softly. You did. They left that night in silence. The car's headlights disappeared down the driveway, swallowed by the dark. I stood at the window until the gravel stopped crunching, until the last echo of betrayal faded. Ms. Lane looked at me. You did the right thing. Maybe, I said. But the right thing often hurts the most. Outside, the wind picked up, scattering the last of the rose petals across the porch. Each one landed softly like a memory settling into place. The trap was set, but the storm hadn't even begun. The morning after their visit, the house was still. The kind of stillness that follows a storm. Not peace, but pause. The air felt heavier, as if the walls themselves were waiting to see what would happen next. I brewed my coffee and sat at the same desk where everything had unfolded, just hours earlier. The rose petals from last night's windstorm were scattered on the floor. Red flecks against the mahogany, a quiet reminder that beauty, like trust, can fall apart in seconds. The envelope they left behind sat unopened on the edge of my desk. They'd been in such a hurry to leave that they forgot it. Or perhaps, in their panic, decided it no longer mattered. I reached for it. Inside was a draft of a court petition, prepared by Sophie. It accused me of being mentally unfit to manage personal and financial affairs. I smiled faintly. Even cornered, they couldn't resist playing their old game. But I had already moved on to the next move in mind. 2 days later, I arrived at the downtown courthouse with Ms. Lane. She walked beside me with that unshakable composure only a seasoned attorney carries, calm, deliberate, dangerous. Inside, I handed her a thick folder, every document, every receipt, every transfer she'd uncovered. And on top, the final piece, a signed letter from my late wife's accountant, confirming that all of Caroline's charitable assets were to remain in trust for educational grants. Not a cent to be touched by family without joint approval. It was the nail in their coffin. We'll file this with the district office by noon, Ms. Lane said. Once it's processed, they'll have no legal claim to anything, not even a single square foot of this property. I nodded, but before she could close the folder, something caught my eye. A new envelope sitting on the desk. Stamped Priority Express. It was addressed to me. No return address. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed neatly. Mr. Langford, I represent a client who recently came across financial transactions linked to the Langford Foundation. These records suggest a potential misappropriation not by your son or daughter-in-law, but by one of your own advisors. The client requests a private meeting tomorrow, 10 a.m. Riverside Cafe. It was unsigned. That night sleep wouldn't come. I kept replaying the words, not by your son or daughter-in-law. Could it be a bluff, a setup? Or had I, in all my precision, overlooked the very thing I prided myself on? The truth hidden between the lines. I sat in my study until the early hours, staring at the family photograph above the fireplace. Caroline's eyes, soft but steady, seemed to question me. Had I gone too far, or not far enough? The next morning, I arrived at the Riverside Cafe early. The place was quiet, An old establishment near the docks. The kind of place where time moved slower and secrets aged gracefully. A woman entered precisely at 10. She was in her 40s, tall, elegant, with a thin leather folder clutched to her chest. She approached my table with purpose. "Mr. Langford," she said softly. "I'm Amelia Rowe. I used to work for your accountant, Mr. Grayson." Grayson, that name hit me like a cold wind. He had handled Caroline's estate after her passing. Trusted, efficient, untouchable. Amelia opened the folder and slid a document toward me. "I thought you should see this before the investigation begins. Mr. Grayson diverted funds from your late wife's foundation for years. He disguised them as maintenance disbursements. Your son and daughter-in-law unknowingly transferred what was already stolen money." For a moment the world blurred. The noise of the cafe disappeared. All I could hear was the slow pulse of realization. My so-called betrayers hadn't taken the first step. They'd simply walked into a trap built years before. I closed the folder carefully. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because," she said, her voice steady, "Mr. Grayson died last month. His files were being audited. I thought your family deserved to know the truth." When I returned home, I sat by the window for hours. The late afternoon light spilled across the garden, soft, gold, indifferent. The roses looked lifeless now, drained of their color. The truth had changed everything, yet somehow changed nothing. Ethan and Sophie had still plotted against me, still tried to take what wasn't theirs. But they weren't the root of the rot, only its fruit. I realized then that the fight wasn't about property. It was about legacy. And legacy isn't just what you leave behind. It's what you allow to continue. That evening I called Ms. Lane. "Pause the filings," I said quietly. She hesitated. "Are you sure?" "Yes," I replied. "There's something I need to fix first, personally." I poured myself a glass of scotch, not to celebrate, not to mourn, just to think. I knew what had to come next. Not vengeance, not forgiveness, but revelation. If Ethan was ever going to understand what family truly meant, what Caroline's legacy stood for, he would have to see the truth, not hear it. And for that I needed one final meeting. The morning of the meeting arrived cloaked in a quiet so tense it felt like the air itself was holding its breath. I woke early, long before sunrise. The house, my house, stood still around me. Every floorboard and shadow a reminder of what had been fought for, lost and clawed back again. The roses outside were still damp with dew. They glowed faintly in the half-light like ghosts of promises once made. I took my time getting ready. A dark suit, a crisp white shirt, the watch Caroline gave me on our 20th anniversary, still ticking. As steady as the life we built. Today wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about closure, about ending this story my son and his wife had begun, but never understood. The meeting was set in the dining room, the same table where Ethan had once declared his intentions to take my home. I'd cleaned it, polished it, and laid out 3 glasses of water, simple, neutral. At 9:15 sharp, the silver sedan pulled into the driveway. I watched from the window as Ethan stepped out, his shoulders tense, his face pale. Sophie followed, composed as always, but her eyes betrayed her unease. They didn't come in with arrogance this time. They came in with fear. "Dad," Ethan began, voice low. "We got your message. You said it was urgent." "It is," I said. "Sit." They sat across from me. I didn't speak for several seconds, letting the silence settle, letting them squirm. Finally, I placed the brown folder on the table, the same one Ms. Lane had prepared. But this time I had added something else inside. Something new. "You wanted this house. You wanted my assets. You wanted me gone," I said evenly. "You nearly got your wish. But before you pushed me off that cliff, did it ever occur to you to ask what was really at the bottom?" Sophie shifted uneasily. "Bruce, we just thought—" "You thought wrong," I interrupted sharply. "You thought this house was the prize. The money, the investments, the foundation, all just things to you. But what you didn't know," I leaned forward, opening the folder, "was that it was all already gone." Their heads snapped up. I slid a document across the table, the signed transfer deed. 3 weeks ago, I donated this estate to the Caroline Langford Education Foundation. Every brick, every beam, every flower outside now belongs to the Scholarship Trust. You can't touch a single inch of it. Ethan's mouth fell open. "You what? You gave it away?" "I returned it," I said, "to where it always belonged. To her legacy, not mine." Sophie blinked rapidly, the color draining from her face. "Then What about the accounts? I placed another paper on the table, a statement of closure from my attorney. All liquid assets were transferred to the foundation as well. What remains is in my living trust. You'll receive your share when you earn it. Not through inheritance, but through service. Service? Ethan repeated bitterly. You want me to work for it? I met his eyes. Exactly. The same way I did. The same way your mother did. I won't leave behind fortune. I'll leave behind opportunity. What you do with it will be your measure, not mine. The words hung there, heavy, true. Sophie's mask cracked first. You're doing this just to punish us, she said. You can't. I cut her off again. You're wrong. I'm doing this to save you. From becoming the kind of people who destroy everything that ever mattered to them. The kind of people I once almost became. Ethan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. His jaw clenched, but his eyes glistened. You think I don't see what this is? You think I haven't noticed how much you still blame me for leaving after? Mom died? The accusation landed deep. But instead of anger, I felt only sadness. Blame you? I said softly. No, I blame myself for not being the father you needed. I built towers, not time. I built a future so big I forgot to fill it with love. Ethan froze. Sophie looked down. The fight drained from the room. For the first time in years, there was silence, not heavy or cruel, but still, honest. I slid one final envelope toward Ethan. Inside is a letter. Your mother wrote it a month before she died. She never wanted you to see it until you were ready. His hands trembled as he opened it. His eyes scanned the words, and within seconds his face broke. My darling boy. If you ever lose your way, remember, your father is not your enemy. He is your mirror. When you see anger in him, it's the reflection of your own pain. Heal that, and you'll find him waiting for you on the other side of forgiveness. Tears fell freely down his cheeks. Sophie reached for his hand, but he didn't move. Dad, he whispered, voice cracking. I didn't know. I thought you just wanted control. I shook my head. No, son. I wanted connection. But control was the only language I knew how to speak. He nodded slowly, then stood. I'm sorry. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of years. When they left that day, the silence in the house felt different, not empty, peaceful. I walked into the garden, the same one I'd tended since the day we moved here. The Caroline roses were in full bloom, blood red, vibrant, alive. I crouched down, brushed a petal with my thumb, and smiled. You'd be proud of him, I whispered. He finally saw the truth. The breeze answered in soft rustles through the leaves, like her laughter carried from somewhere unseen. I stood there for a long while, the sun dipping low, painting the sky in gold. The world for once didn't feel like it was slipping away, because I finally understood, legacy isn't about what you keep, it's about what you let go of. That evening, I sat by the fire with my journal open. On the first page, I wrote the title, The Audit of Love, and beneath it one final note. True wealth isn't built from what we earn or inherit. It's built from what we learn, and what we're brave enough to forgive. I closed the book. Outside, the garden glowed under the moonlight. And for the first time in a long time, I felt Caroline's presence not as a memory, but as a quiet peace within me. The house was no longer mine, but the lesson was, and that was worth far more than $3.8 million.